With John Tavares turning 34 in September, the Leafs are going to need a depth center, and they need to add a lot of different pieces if they want to contend for the Cup this upcoming season. And rumors are starting to escalate regarding who those potential fits could be for the Leafs. So to break that down and discuss who we think is the best option. So stay tuned for all that. Before we do, we are extremely close to 10,000 subscribers. We may have hit it by the time this video goes out, but if we haven't, and even if we have, make sure to hit the subscribe button if you're a part of the 80% who are not subscribed. In our next video, we'll have an official thank you for 10K if we hit it by then. But thank you guys for your support. It's been unbelievable. We make daily Leafs content, sometimes multiple videos a day, and we'll have a stream for you guys, of course, on Wednesday as well. So thank you guys for your continued support. Darius, a lot to get over today. Obviously, the Stanley Cup playoffs are still going on. There's some fun games, but we're going to talk about John Tavares and who could be a depth centerpiece for the Leafs going forward, because like I mentioned in the intro, Tavares is turning 34. Can he continue to play second line center is up in the air? He's playing very good for Team Canada, and if he can play like that, then sure, maybe he has a couple years left in him. But he's also a pending UFA after this year, and a couple of guys that come to mind are, which we'll get into now. We know for a fact the Leafs could use a long-term answer at the second line center position, and Tavares will turn 34 in September. Eventually, they'll want to move him. Easton Cowan, of course, is a guy that could be brought up, but I want to get into a couple of the targets here. We're looking at Elias Lindholm and Chandler Stephenson. We'll get into some of the rumors regarding the Leafs, regarding some other teams here. Jake DeBrusk, again, we're going to keep bringing him up because it looks like he could be not returning to the Boston Bruins. But Darius, what are your thoughts on this whole situation? It's obviously the Leafs need a goalie, they need defensemen, and depending what happens in the Mitch Marner trade, maybe they'll solve their second line center through this. But regarding free agency, they need a second line center going forward because John Tavares is not getting any younger.
No, and I think he's going to return on a lower AAV contract after next season, John Tavares, that is. But he's going to be either a third line center or even moved to the wing, and most probably going to be moved to the wing. So they're going to need an option there, and you might as well start looking. And there's a couple decent options in free agency this year. Elias Lindholm, obviously a pretty good option, but it's going to cost you quite a bit, right? They're about the same age, him and Chandler Stephenson, but it's going to cost you quite a bit. The only thing I'm a bit worried about on these projections, at least from Frank Saravalli, is the term, 5 years. It's going to take them to 35. They're going to be old themselves. They're going to be what John Tavares is now at that point, and that might be a problem somewhere down the line. But I do like Chandler Stephenson, and we're going to zero on him for this video at least, and Elias Lindholm could be a topic for another day, but it doesn't sound like he's going to stay in Vancouver either. He might be moving on, so that would be interesting. But Chandler Stephenson, he's won 2 Stanley Cups. This is something I've been bringing up the last little bit. The Leafs need to start adding guys who've actually won the Stanley Cup and know what it takes to win the Stanley Cup, because I think that's very important. They kept adding veteran leadership that's never won, so I don't know how good that's or what good that's going to do you and the roster. So I think it's a pretty interesting option in free agency this year. I'm just worried about the fact that he's already 30 years old. So yes, he will be a great option for the next 2-3 years, but after that could be a bit of a liability as well.
Yeah, 2 30-year-olds, and we're obviously talking about, in theory, long-term plays, but I think even in our definition of long-term, their goal is to win the Cup in the next 3 to 4 years. Obviously, Bruba's hired for 4 years, and in theory, their prime will be from now until really 27 to 32 or 33, could push to 34, and that works with Chandler Stephenson. So, again, Easton Cowan is a potential guy, which we'll have another video on coming up soon, but focusing in on Chandler Stephenson here, you look at some of his stats, and they're very, very impressive. He's obviously played with the Vegas Golden Knights for the past 5 years. 51 points last season, 65 points the season before, 64 points the season before, is 30 years old, but this is the textbook definition of a guy that could be the Leafs' second-line center, and that pushes John Tavares down to the third-line center. It kind of pushes everybody down, and would make so much sense for this Leafs team. Again, the issue is, because of how good his seasons have been recently, the contract prediction, again, this is from the article from Frank Saravalli predicting his 75, I believe it was, free agents' salaries. And you're looking at it, 5 years, $5.6 million, a little bit similar to Tyler Bertuzzi, but I'd rather have him, obviously different positions. Chandler Stephenson's a center, but I want him. And the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. Obviously, he's not necessarily a huge goal scorer. He's more of he gets a lot of assists for sure, but I don't know. I like this idea if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs. It would really just push everyone down and make the team deeper, and these are the type of guys you need to make deep playoff runs, and even just to make the playoffs in general, especially if you're moving off Mitch Marner.
Yeah, and it's a similar contract, like you said, projection at least to what Bertuzzi is going to get, but centers are more valuable than wingers, and that's just the fact of the matter. And the Leafs need a second-line center, whether it's this year or going into next year, I should say, or the year after when Tavares comes off the books. Probably going to resign, like I said, and play a different position or a different role. But the one thing that interested me the most with Chandler Stephenson is last year when he won the Stanley Cup with the Vegas Golden Knights. He was almost a point a game player in the playoffs. Super impressive. And like you said, he's not going to get you a bazillion goals, but doesn't really have to. This guy knows what it takes to win. He's pretty consistent at what he does, and I think he would be a pretty decent option. But again, there's a lot of other teams looking at this player as well. So the Leafs are going to have to figure out the cap situation pretty quick, because now, like we talked about in a video just a few days ago, Max Domi and Tyler Bertuzzi are back on the radar for the Leafs, and they want to sign them long term. So I wonder if they take a look at, upgrading at the center position already, because if you don't do it now, you're going to have to do it in a year's time anyway. So might as well get things rolling.
Yeah, and it seems like, again, the Bertuzzi thing, a lot of Leafs fans are kind of on one side or the other. I would much rather have Chandler Stephenson next year than Tyler Bertuzzi. Obviously, Bertuzzi has some more familiarity with the Leafs, at least from playing with them last year, and is a great playoff player in theory. But so is Chandler Stephenson. You just mentioned it. He had a great playoffs with the Vegas Golden Knights this year. So, I don't know. Very interesting. I love the idea of Chandler Stephenson, and someone we'll keep an eye on if the Leafs go for him going forward. But a few other things to note. So, Friedman has been saying that Boston will likely have Lindholm and Stephenson, similar to the Leafs, on their radar. Two players I'd be fine with the Leafs looking at. I'm also talking myself into thinking the Leafs take a swing at getting Jake DeBrusk. And this kind of has two different meanings here. So by Friedman saying this, it means that there's a higher likelihood that Boston doesn't bring back Jake DeBrusk if they're looking at Lindholm and Stevenson. Now, there is obviously a chance. We've seen rumors that the Leafs are interested in Jacob DeBrusk and that the Bruins might not bring him back. Darius, DeBrusk obviously is a guy that we've discussed a little bit, but it seems like the Bruins and the Leafs have similar targets right now, because all three names on this screenshot from this tweet are targets that the Leafs will most likely look at, with Elias Lindholm being probably the least likely out of these three. But I'm with Ryan on this. I'm also trying to convince myself of Jake DeBrusk. It's making more and more sense. Will I prefer him over Bertuzzi? Maybe, given the contract, but Ryan Fancy is right here.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, the Bruins have very similar needs to the Leafs in some ways as well. So obviously they're taking a look at the same players. So are the Jets. I mean, those players are on the Winnipeg Jets radar as well, as we've learned over the last couple of days. I think the Leafs could take a stab at Jake DeBrusk as well, because Tyler Bertuzzi isn't a sure thing at this point. I'm sure they're working through the contract, but if you take a look, if you're the Leafs and you're like, listen, we need a second line center, maybe we can get this done right now in free agency. We can't afford Tyler Bertuzzi anymore. Jake DeBrusk is right there at a much lower number, right? And I mean, the stats, at least for last year, are pretty similar. Jake DeBrusk and Tyler Bertuzzi score about at half a point a game, right? So different players are not exactly the same, but both of them are known to get it done in the playoffs as well. So it could be an option for the Leafs. It depends which route they want to go. Obviously, Bertuzzi played with the Leafs last year, so you would want to bring a player back, obviously, because he's familiar with the city and the systems and all that, even though some of that will change with the new coaching staff. But he's just familiar with the team. But if you have to go a cheaper route with Jake DeBrusk, I don't think that's a bad option either, especially if you're filling in a second-line center position. Tavares drops down to third-line center. That would not be bad at all.
Yeah, I like all these guys. And you look at some of the, again, projected cap hits. Lindholm, Stevenson, Monahan's another guy that the Jets, and we're looking at the Jets here, like the Leafs, the Jets, the Bruins, all these teams who flared out in the playoffs are going to have similar targets this offseason, simply because, I mean, they're the best players available. There's some good players available right now, and Sean Monahan's one we brought up. I don't know how likely that is. I'd still rather Chandler Stephenson, but Monahan will probably get less term given his past play and age, and he's had some off seasons. But overall, there's only, like, you look at Nicholas Roy, like, there's so many players that we could get into and discuss about the targets. This is another one we'll probably have a video on in the future. Like, there's a lot of different teams. Obviously, Vegas needs to clear some cap space. They have a great core down the middle with their centers. So I think it could be an interesting fit, not for a trade, but for a potential free agency signing, or maybe a trade, depending on how things happen. Any final thoughts on this for wrap up?
Yeah, I think the Leafs have to start looking at the second line center position sooner rather than later. So if they can get it done in free agency this year, I think that's something that they at least have to look at, because it's going to become an issue very quickly. It already is becoming an issue, to be honest. And I think they have a lot of options. And even Nicholas Waugh, we can make a video on that. Stay tuned for something on that. Obviously, it's a hypothetical and it's all speculation, but I think him as a third line center would be a good option too, because Vegas is needing to shed some cap and some players as well, because they have a lot of players. So that could be an interesting option as well if you want to move Tavares to the wing. But again, a little bit of speculation, but it's fun around this time of year.
Yeah, lots of targets to go, but that'll wrap it up. Let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on all of this, and which of these players that we discussed today would you want to be on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Thank you guys for watching. Hit the subscribe button. We're very close. Or we hit 10,000. Let us know, and we'll see you tomorrow.